with the theme of Havdalah. Okay. For first Shlema, for Shifra Simcha Bat Yeta, and for all the Cholim of Klal Yisrael.
Amen.
Okay.
Amen.
In addition to using spices, flowers, or herbs, certain authorities permit the use of a fragrant fruit, but perfume or air freshening sprays may not be used. It is preferable to reserve a spice box, especially for the mitzvah, and there is a custom to use hadassim. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. The third blessing is made over a flame, for which a number of reasons are given. A, to consciously perform a malacha, demonstrating the separation of the weekday from the Shabbos. B, to commemorate the creation of fire when Adam struck together two flintstones after the first Shabbos had ended. And C, to represent the pillar of fire Hashem gave to Adam after the first Shabbos to provide light and protection. Okay, let me just give one more point here. The flame should flicker by burning on more than one wick. One should gaze at the reflection of the flame in one's fingernails. Since fingernails are constantly growing, they symbolize goodness. Okay, so...
On what, Kevin?
I don't know if they symbolize goodness because they grow. They grow as in people are growing. It's a good thing. It's a positive thing.
So just one thing in terms of what you teach in Kev is the reason we look at our fingernails is that it says that when Adam Rishon was created, he had a translucent sort of material that mimicked almost the fingernail material that we have, but it was encapsulated in his whole body. And therefore, what we have to do when we get to Havdalah is before we start the week, we have to take that spiritual elevation on Shabbos, remind ourselves what Adam was like before the sin, and have a goal forward to go through the week of what our potential is to achieve. That potential could be looking at anything. I mean, I could be looking at my heart in a mirror, which the potential never happened. But the thing of it is with the translucence of skin, it has to remind us of Adam Rishon's corporeal being. In other words, he was both spiritual and physical, and that's the essence of it. And Kevin, you teaching us is getting more and more fluent every time, so thank you, mate.
Shukar. Damon, you nailed it. Well done, Shukar. You nailed it, guys.
So that's a new parsha. We don't hold by that. He was held by that. He was held by that, but we don't hold by that.
Absolutely.
All right. So before we get ourselves kicked off, what we're going to do is we're going to kick off. And we're going to kick off with the Mishnah. And we've done the Mishnah. What I want to do is I've got to have an experiment here. I think it's going to work well. Kevin's exhausted. He hasn't slept much. So what we're going to do now is I want to give you guys, instead of going to the minutiae of detail, I'm going to try a broad overlay of the daf. And when I do a broad overlay of the daf, you guys might just get a sense of it before I add the detail, just to get a bit of a flow going. And why? Because I want to almost have accomplished finishing the first book. Even if we spend the rest of the week going through the detail of the daf, it's a nice accomplishment. You know what I mean? It's a very special accomplishment. Arth, is the cat going to be okay, or is it going to continue?
No, the cat's fine. It's walking around the computer.
Right. Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen. All right, and since Arthur was the one that did Chazorah on this stuff, which I appreciated, Arthur may read the full Mishnah. Read carefully, mate, because sometimes your eyes aren't as good as mine. I'm kidding. Your eyes are better than mine. All right, just read.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me get my glasses on so I can do this properly.
Very funny.
If an ox was pursuing another ox, and it, the ox being chased, was later found damaged, and this one, the damaged party, says, your ox did the damage. And this one, the owner of the pursuing ox, says, no, not so. Rather, it injured itself on a rock. The law is that the burden of proof rests on the one who seeks to exact money from his fellow. If two oxen, each belonging to a different person, pursuing a single ox that belonged to a third person, and the ox being chased was later found injured, this one, the owner of one of the pursuing oxes, says, your ox did the damage. And this one, the owner of the other ox, other pursuing ox says, no, your ox did the damage.
Excellent. I'm going to give you the rest of the Mishnah to read. Just give me one moment, mate.
I feel so honored.
Okay, just give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen now, and then you can continue to read. Okay, Arthur, read.
Okay. Both of them are exempt.
Right.
If both of them belong to one man, both of them are liable. If one of these oxen was large and one was small, and the damaged party says the large ox did the damage, while the large ox did the damage, while the damager says, not so, rather the small ox did the damage. Or if one ox was a tam and the other was a muad, and the damaged party says, the muad did the damage, while the damager says, not so, rather the tam did the damage. In both of these cases, the burden of proof rests on the one who seeks to exact money from his fellow. The Mishnah to this point has discussed a case in which a single ox was chased by two oxen. The Mishnah now discusses a case where two oxen were chased and both were injured, but it is not known which ox was injured by which pursuer. If the damaged oxen were two, one large and one small, and the damages were also two, one large and one small, and the damaged party says the large ox damaged the large one, and the small ox damaged the small one, while the damager says not so. Rather, the small ox damaged the large one, and the large one damaged the small one. Or if one ox was tam and one ox was muad, and the damaged party says the muad damaged the large ox, and the tam damaged the small one, while the damager says not so. Rather, the tam damaged the large ox, and the muad damaged the small one. In both cases, the burden of proof rests on the one who seeks exact money from his fellow.
Perfect. All right, so guys, in a nutshell, what we're saying is we bring in different cases. We don't need to spend the whole year redoing the Mishnah. The reason why I wanted to read it again is because, for example, the Rosh Hashiva of Mir said he reads the Mishnah 6 times in order to have the understanding. What we basically understood from this from yesterday was very, very simple. The first case deals with where one ox was pursuing another, and then the damaged ox was found to be injured, and he's accusing this owner of the pursuing ox and saying, listen, your ox damaged my ox. And he said, no, actually it injured itself on a rock. So obviously the damage is trying to get out of it. We did discuss, though, that, there's an opinion that says that if it ran and had a heavy impact into the rock because it was running away from the pursuer, some opinions hold the damager liable because it wouldn't have hit the rock with such force unless it was running away from the attacking ox. But the majority of opinions seem to say it's groma, it's indirect, it's causative, meaning unless the ox did the damage itself, even if the ox ran away and injured itself in the rock, it's not the same as the attacking ox doing the damage. And the law is the burden of proof rests on the one who seeks to exact money from his fellow. Second case, we dealt with that it's a single ox, and it's being chased by two different oxen, and each one has a different owner, and each owner is blaming the other. And there were witnesses, but they don't know whose ox belongs to whom. So then that's difficult because then both the owners of the ox are exempt unless it can bring proof as to which owner's ox did the damage. And then what we're stating in this particular case is you've got another issue where there's a large ox and a small ox that did the damage, and obviously the damaged party is saying no, it was your large ox because he wants to claim with the tam ox from the larger portion of the damaging animal. And the same thing with muad and tam is the damaged party says no, you owe me food damages because it was your muad ox. We're talking in a case where a guy has a muad ox and a tam ox, and he was saying, listen, it's your muad ox that did the damage. And even if the muad ox did the damage because it's more probably likely because it had been forewarned Again, the burden of proof rests upon the one who seeks to exact money from his fellow. The last case deals where there were 2 oxen that were injured by another 2 oxen, and there were only 2 owners. The damaged party who owned 2 oxen and the attacking oxen's owner. And again, the same argument ensues. No, it was your large ox that attacked my large one, your small one attacked my small one. No, it was the opposite way around. It was Muad that attacked. No, it was Tam. The bottom line is that the damaged party wants to exact as much payment as possible, and the damager wants to negate as much responsibility as possible. Okay. Record. Okay, good. All right, guys, we're going to a different approach now completely. I'm going to do a brief overview of the Gemara and go at quite a fast pace in order just to get a sense of it. I hope you don't mind. And then don't worry if you don't have. You will with the detail, but I think a broader brush stroke will help you. All right. Rav Chia bar Abba said, the Mishnah is saying that Sumchus, colleagues disagree with Sumchus. So what did Sumchus say? Money ownership lies in doubt is divided by the litigant. So I'm going to say it again. Sorry, we had a coughing disturbance. So Kevin asked a great question yesterday. He says, listen, Kevin asked actually a logical question. If nobody's sure, why don't we just divide the money? Why does it end up with one miserable party? So we were saying there are 2 opinions. The rabbis are saying, no, look, the burden of proof has to be on the one that's trying to extract money from his fellow. And Sumchus is saying, look, you can't be sure in either case. Why don't you just come to some sort of agreement and then split the money? Okay. So those are the 2 opinions. So just hang on a second. Arthur, just pause the recording.
Yeah.
Damon speaking. Good day. How can I help you?
Hi, am I speaking to Damon?
Yeah, speaking.
Hi, Damon. You're speaking to Lopomelelo from Tito Island. How are you?
All right, and you?
I'm fine, thanks. I wanted to ask for assistance, please. We're just busy. The finance department is busy with the audit, and they've asked for your company's BE certificate. Do you have one?
Yeah, I've got a BE exemption status, which is valid for companies under 10 million rand.
Are you going to be able to send it to me, maybe?
Yeah, send me an email. I'll return it with the affidavit. No problem. I've sent it to you already, but I'll send it specifically now. It was an email 3 of 3. I'll send it to you again. Send me an email.
All right. I'll just send the email through right now.
Thanks, Abe. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye.
So this is the irritating thing about giving the share during a workday. All right. So all right. So let's go back to what we were discussing.
Yeah, recording.
Okay.
It was about compromising.
About
Reaching a
compromise.
compromise.
Correct. And this is where this particular part of the Gemara comes in. Okay. So we're saying a question is raised regarding Sumchus's view. Rav Abba bar Mamal said to Rav Chia bar Abba, did Sumchus say his ruling even when litigants claim certainly and certainly? Okay, I'm going to have to give you a bit of background here. All right, unfortunately, we're going to have to put in the brakes a bit. Otherwise, it's not going to make any sense. So what happens is, let me just tell you how Sumchus derived this. We're going to learn in 46b in Bava Kamma, right? There's a brisa that discusses the case of an ox that gored a cow. And her dead fetus was found at her side. Now, it's unknown whether the cow aborted the fetus spontaneously, in other words, before being gored, in which case the owner of the ox is not liable for the fetus as well. Okay, the attacking ox. But we don't know maybe whether it aborted its fetus as a result of being gored. In other words, it went into bodily shock, where the owner of the ox is now liable for not only the cow, but the fetus as well. So Sumchus basically rules that since the situation is inherently in doubt, and not merely brought into doubt by the conflicting claims of the litigants, okay, the owner of the ox pays for the dead fetus half of what he would have paid had it been certain that his ox caused the death. The rabbis don't feel that way. They disagree, and they maintain that the burden of proof actually rests on the one who seeks to exact money from his fellow, even in a situation of inherent doubt. Are you with me, guys? That's a quintessential case between Sumkus and the rabbis. So how does it relate to this particular daf? Well, simple. In the first case of our Mishnah, we're seeing there's an ox that's being pursued by another ox, and it was found injured. So there's an inherent doubt here. Why? Because we don't know if the damage was caused by the pursuing ox or by the rock. Okay. So Sumkus would draw in this case that the owner of the pursuing ox must pay the owner of the injured ox half the amount he would have had to pay had it been certain that his ox did the damage. Meaning that if witnesses can testify to that, then there's the burden of proof already on the damaged party to bring the case to court. But if there's, give me one sec, if there's proof that his ox was injured, but we don't know if he was injured from the other ox or whether it was as a result of panicking and colliding against the rock, in that case, Sumkos says, look, the damager should at least pay half the amount of damage. What were you going to ask, Kevin?
Perhaps. Don't they use the word perhaps as well? Perhaps and certainly.
Yeah, there is perhaps and certainly, and we're going to explain what that means in this coming up case. But the first thing I want to do in the Gemara, for those that haven't done Chazorah, those listening, or is that before we confuse it with perhaps, certainly, defendant, plaintiff, etc., let's keep the case clear. So the first thing we're discussing is a classic case where Sumkos and the rabbis disagree. And that's a case, Kevin, where we're not sure. In other words, with a fetus and a cow, the owner of the damaged or dead cow has come across this dead cow and the fetus and heard rumblings amongst his employees that there was another ox that gored them. But they can't make clarity of the situation. And the owner of the damager ox wasn't there either to witness it. So there's a situation of inherent doubt. Neither party knows for sure what happened. So Sumkus is saying in a case where neither party knows for sure, in other words, there's inherent doubt. And in inherent doubt, that's a case of perhaps. Let me just clarify what Kevin's saying. Kevin did Chazorah. So there's a case in the Gemara called certainly. This one is certainly sure of his point of view, and that one is certainly sure of their point of view. Are you with me, Gavin? The plaintiff and the defendant are totally adamant in their opinion. Fine. And they both feel that they've got a strong case. Perhaps means neither one witnessed it, but they would like it to be in their favor, but nobody's sure. So in the case of non-clarity, Sumkos says, listen, let the damager divide what he would have owed. Let him pay 50% of that half. Okay? But what is going on in the Gemara here is we're saying, listen, when we're dealing with the case of an ox that's pursued by another ox, is it like the damaged party said that it was the attacking ox that caused this? Or is it like the defendant said, not the ox that was damaged, but the attacking ox, he said, no, your animal actually injured itself on a rock. So this is obviously the premise, assuming the fact that we hold on groma, meaning that if the attacking ox went after a particular ox and that ox ran to escape and injured itself, that there's no responsibility on the owner of the attacking ox by those that hold that groma. It's causative damage, indirect damage. But if we hold that as a result of running away from the attacking ox, it was injured, and that there is what you call a consequence of sequence, in that particular case, there's nothing to talk about because there's no case here. In other words, the damager can't use that as a defense. So we're obviously talking about when the rabbis hold there's a case of groma here, indirect damage. So we're saying when that's...
Can I just stop you 1 second? You said it's half payment. So if the ox is more, is it half payment? And if the ox is time, is it half of half or not?
Okay, that's an excellent question. The reality is here is that there's another factor. one of the factors is, well, I think that factor would be taken into account, although there's no direct evidence of goring. But I would think that that factor would definitely be taken into account, Gavin, so that it would either be, instead of full payment damages, half payment damages, or instead of half payment damages, it would be quarter payment damages. I think you're right there. I'm not sure, but it would make sense.
It seems to make sense.
Yeah. So Rav Chia bar Abba said, listen, is this particular case of an ox chasing another ox, and the ox apparently, according to the damager, was injured by a rock, and the injured party by the pursuing ox? Is this a case of doubt, where, according to Sumchus, the money is divided between the litigants? Okay, so that's the question here. And who was asked this? Well, Rav Abba bar Mamal asked this of Rav Chia bar Abba. Okay, so what the question that he asked him, Gavin, was as follows. Did Sumchus say his ruling even when the litigants claim certainly and certainly? So what are we saying here? Where's Arthur? I mean, the last few shirim is never on video. Arthur?
I'm just spraying my back. Sorry, it's just so sore. I'll join you now. I can hear you.
All right, well, I'll wait for you.
So
No, I can hear you. I'm right next to you. I'm just spraying my
Well, Kev,
back.
we've got two people AWOL, and it's me and Kevin.
Okay, I'm not AWOL. I am here.
Damon, so they're adamant that comes the damager and the damaged. Say the damaged party says it was certainly damaged, and it didn't. It wasn't. There was no groma. There was no. It wasn't an injury. It was actually damage. It wasn't injured on a rock, but it was damage caused by the attacking oxen. Is that what they're certain about that?
Yeah, they're certain about their point of view. That's exactly right.
You don't
sorry,
use certainty.
I'm back.
Not, but the damaging oxen's owner is certain that they didn't cause the damage. Does he also use it, or does the damaged owner, the damaged ox use that? Was it, or is it only one way, or is it both ways?
Okay, hang on a second. What are you asking?
Who's saying with certainty? Is it the damaged ox owner, the damaged ox side?
Okay, so we're going to discuss a case of who's certain. Is it the damaged party that's certain, or the damager that's certain? We're going to see the implication of that. But at the moment, we're dealing with general terms. What are those general terms? We're dealing with the fact of the quintessential case was when you had an ox and a calf. You found a fetus and a female cow, and both were found dead. And we don't know if the goring caused the mother's body to go into shock and to excrete the fetus, and the fetus died prematurely, or that the two incidents were not linked and she gave birth and the fetus died of its own accord before she was gored. So that's a case of perhaps. So what we're saying is here, can we hold Basumchus's dividing of the money in the case where it's certainly? So we're saying, hang on, let's just get the case clear. Both parties are sure it's certain. The damager is certain that the ox escaping injured itself in a rock, or he's claiming is certain. And the damaged party is certain that it was the pursuing ox that damaged his ox. Okay, so this is a case which each one is claiming is certain. Okay, so we're saying, does Sumchus's rule occur when there's a case of certainty? There was only a case of inherent doubt where you split the money. Otherwise, the burden of proof lies on the damaged party to extract the money. So what's the problem here? The problem primarily, Gavin, is that how do we put it in a simple way? You see, at the end of the day, it doesn't go away, because even though the litigants claim they're certain, they still need evidence. The court doesn't know, according to Rashi, the court still doesn't know who to believe, and that's why it still views the situation as inherent doubt. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So is this if the damaged party, where both parties are saying certainly this is actually in front of in presence of the judge or Beis Din, or that they're saying this in court?
What it's saying is as follows: is it's saying, look, we can understand with a case where a cow extricated a fetus, and in that particular case, we don't know if it was the goring ox that sent the mother's body into shock, or she gave birth first to the calf. We don't know. But this case, we're saying that it doesn't seem to mimic that case, because both the damaged party and the damager are claiming that they're both certain of their point of view. So we're saying this doesn't seem to mimic the case, because this is a case of the damager is certain that the injured ox injured itself against a rock, and the owner of the injured ox is claiming and is sure that the attacking ox actually gored it and created its damage. So is this a case where both parties are certain? Can this even be matched to a case where both the parties had inherent doubt? They weren't sure of the situation. So that's clear. So what we're saying is here is basically from the fact that Rav Chia bar Abba finds it necessary to deduce from our Mishnah that the rabbis disagree with Sumchus. It's evident that he understood Sumchus's ruling to apply even in cases where both litigants claim certainty. Okay? I'll tell you why. Because if Sumchus maintained his ruling only in cases where the litigants themselves do not know what really happened, like, for example, in the case of a fetus found next to a gored cow, then why must Rav Chia bar Abba prove from our Mishnah that the rabbis disagree? The Bryce of Sumchus says it explicitly. So he must have meant, Rav Chia bar Abba, that his statement demonstrates that there's still a valid dispute between Sumchus and the rabbis, even in a case where the litigants each claim to know with certainty. Okay? So then Rav Abba bar Mamal is confused. He says, well, I don't understand why he holds his ruling in such cases, because he's not questioning Rav Chia bar Abba's statement. He's just saying he's surprised that Sumchus would hold this way in a case where both parties are certain. He doesn't know. And the reason for differentiating between the cases in which the litigants claim certainty and those in which they admit doubt is that in the latter cases, the doubt is truly inherent. In other words, there were no witnesses in terms of the damage or the damaged party witnessing the event. So no one knows what really happened. But in a case where litigants actually claim to know what happened, you might say that you can't consider the uncertainty inherent, because each one is claiming that they've witnessed the event. So from the perspective of the litigants, uncertainty isn't inherent. So you might think by logic that Sumchus agrees that you can't basically exact money from someone without actual proof. So we're saying, look, each one of them says they've witnessed the event. Okay, but what Gavin and I learned yesterday, which we learned before, is that you have two litigants. You've got the plaintiff and the defendant, the person suing and the person defending the action. They cannot be witnesses. Witnesses are third parties. They can give testimony, but they're not believed as witnesses because each one has a vested interest. Kevin?
Mm.
The whole point of a witness is somebody that's got nothing to gain by giving testimony.
Sure.
So, in other words, you can't really be a witness if you've got a vested interest in the case. You can give testimony, but whether or not that testimony will hold water, would be up to the judge. And what we're saying is here, yes, each one has claimed to have witnessed it, but who knows if they're lying, if they misunderstood, if they really saw what they saw. So the judge cannot be sure. So this is still a case of inherent doubt.
Well, one party is definitely lying, always.
Maybe, but maybe, Gavin, they think they saw what they saw.
They think they saw, so there's no.
Yeah,
there's
sometimes, okay, I agree with that. That can happen.
There's no 100%. They're saying that to protect their claim.
Exactly.
That they'd witnessed it.
Even if
that's not. Sorry, okay.
Well, the one ox could have been chasing the other ox. They were both watching, and then they went round the corner, all right, and they couldn't. They got out of view of everybody. But it was just presumed. I'm just guessing. They just presumed that the attacking ox caused indirectly caused the other ox to cut itself or whatever.
Look, the bottom line is it could be two ways. It could be, as Gavin says, one of the witnesses is lying through their teeth. Or it could be that, like, if you watch a sport event, they use camera footage because, like, you can have two people watching the match from different angles, and you think that they might have scored a try in rugby, or they might have been past the line, or we don't know. People are adamant, especially when their own teams are involved. So you can't be emotionally objective when you stand to lose money or your team stands to lose the rugby cup. So it's not always a case of lying. It's like you're absolutely convinced of it.
And also, habitual liars always think they're right.
Correct. So Rashi says, since the court does not know whom to believe, it's viewed as a situation as one of inherent doubt. So the clarity that we've got is that basically Rav Abba bar Mamal got a clarity from Rav Chia bar Abba that says, listen, it doesn't matter what the litigants claim. What actually matters here is what the judge can prove, is what the parties can prove. So at the meantime, it's one of inherent doubt. What's inherent doubt is that, well, you need evidence. So it would seem that if you need evidence, then why would Sumchus's case still stand of splitting the difference? And the reason being is that because it is of inherent doubt, Sumchus says you can't prove it either way. So therefore you split the difference of what's owed. And the rabbis say no, the damaged party has to prove his case. But it's still one of non-clarity of inherent doubt as opposed to certainly and certainly. All right, let's move on quickly. So Rav Chia bar Abba says to him, yes, Sumchus said his ruling, even where the litigants claim certainly and certainly. And the Gemara asks, and on what basis did Rav Chia bar Abba conclude that our Mishnah refers to a case in which the litigants claim certainly and certainly? Perhaps the Mishnah speaks of a case in which the litigants put forth their claims as possibilities rather than certainties. Okay? So what it's saying is here is that maybe the litigants admit that they don't know whether the plaintiff's ox was injured on a rock or by the defendant's ox. So accordingly, we can only prove that our Mishnah is mimicking that other brisa where Sumchus and the rabbis disagree in cases of uncertain claims. However, the Gemara is asking, in cases where the litigants claim to be certain of their positions, perhaps Sumchus agrees that they do not divide the claim. On what basis did Rav Chia bar Abba assume that our Mishnah speaks of a case in which they make claims of certainty and thereby demonstrate that Sumchus disagrees even in such a case? Okay. So what the answer is there is that the Mishnah taught that the case was one in which this one says your ox did the damage, and this one says not so. The response not so connotes that the defendant is certain that the damage was not done by his ox. Okay? So initially now what's proposed by Rav Chia bar Abba is that there's a dispute between Sumchus and the rabbis, even where the litigants make their claim with certainty. Okay? So in that particular case, what would be your disagreement with that? Guys?
Can you just repeat that?
Okay, what I'm saying is Rav Chia Bar Abba concludes that this could be a case of certainly and certainly, because both of the parties come with claims that they're absolutely certain about what they've done.
So this is unfair to the person who's correct, because he can't get his full claim; he can only get half.
Well, he's lucky to get any claim at all, because if it wasn't honestly for Sumchus, he'd have to prove his case to the rabbis.
Yeah.
But in any event, there has to be proof. No one. You're saying someone's going to get prejudiced, and it's not fair. There's some.
What I'm saying
could be in limbo, the whole thing.
Okay, what I'm saying, Kevin, in a nutshell, is as follows: is that, listen, it seems to me that Rav Chaim Bar Abba is basically saying this is a case of certainly and certainly, because both parties are certain. So the question I asked for you is that the case? And my answer is no, because it doesn't matter, even if they're convinced that they're right, unless there's evidence. This is a case of inherent doubt. And in a case, Kevin, of inherent doubt, Sumchus says you split the money. And Kevin, it's not unfair. What's more unfair is that the damaged party has to prove his case, when in fact the attacking party can make some trumped up charge and false claim.
Yeah. So listen, no. Yeah, I kind of didn't pick it up right. So it's basically if obviously no one knows exactly what happened here. Bottom line. So it doesn't matter if they both stating that they're 100% correct. There's no proof. There's no witnesses. So it's obviously doubt. So he's lucky to get something. You're right.
Yeah. Exactly.
No, I agree with you. Yeah. I didn't quite cut it correctly.
So both parties could be lying. Okay. So for example,
yes.
Not now with the rock. That's very unlikely. But in the case of Tam and Muad, or large ox, small ox, that the injured party might be trying to get greedy, or the damager might be trying to get out. We don't know who's lying. So at least with Sumchus's point of view, they're both miserably compromised, meaning it's kind of fair because they both take half the hit. And then the rabbis also fair because they say if you can't prove your case, how can you just get half your money extracted when you can't bring any evidence? It's also fair. The rabbis have got a good point too.
Of course.
So the rabbis are saying that that you don't even share, and he's saying it. What's his name? What's his name?
Sumchus.
The Simchus says you split it, even if there's no real facts, but you split it. Whereby the rabbis say there has to be facts, there has to be valid, there has to be concrete proof. Otherwise, zero. You get nothing.
Correct. So the rabbis are saying,
and it's up.
Yeah.
Now let me finish 1 second, and it's up to the damaged party to prove.
Yes.
To prove the guilt of the damaged party, of the damager.
Absolutely.
How were they damaged? Were they if the pursuing oxen used Keren to damage, and there's proof of entry with a horn, they have to find proof of injury.
Well,
that might be the only way the damage.
I like Kevin's point, and it's something I thought about. Firstly, I think Kevin's point is valid, is that when you examine the animal, it's very likely to see the difference between an impact injury and a piercing injury. And unless you've got a rock that seems to point exactly like a horn, it's pretty clear that it's the horn. But we learned that the tordos of Keren can also be other things like kicking. So, for example, if there's an impact like that in kicking and it shatters the animal's femur, or the animal runs against a rock and hits the femur, It's a bit more difficult to prove than a standard goring in a total of Keren. Okay? So Kevin's making a good point, but that is an issue.
Because goring stands out. It's easy to see.
So I can see it from the rabbi's point of view and Sumchus's point of view. Why do I see it from Sumchus's point of view? Is because sometimes you're not in ideal circumstance where, as the injured party, you've got all the evidence and then you're going to end up getting nothing. So he feels at least both parties should make reparations and come to some arrangement. But if you're a person where suddenly you get accused of something, like God forbid a person gets accused of rape, and it was let's take a case of rape that is consensual, that all of a sudden now she's got buyer's remorse. Okay? Where she's accusing a person of rape, and in fact it was consensual, but she liked to have intercourse that was very rough. So it looks like forced entry. Now he's got a hell of a problem. Are you with me? I'm just giving you real cases. So then in that case, how do you go around accusing somebody? People's lives have been ruined by things like this. So the rabbi's view is you can't just randomly accuse somebody unless you've got evidence to win your accusation, whether it's criminal or civil. So you can see it from both points of view. All right, so let's just go on. So we're saying it doesn't matter how convincing or confident. Either they're lying convincingly or they're so confident in their point of view, like two people on opposite sides of the stadium supporting two different soccer or rugby teams, and are adamant that what they saw is correct. Okay, they can believe it. But it's not...
Kevin can relate to that very easily.
Correct. But unless there's camera footage, who knows? So all I'm saying is this is a case that just because it looks like certainly and certainly doesn't mean it's a case of that unless there's evidence. And if there's evidence, then my question is, if there is clear evidence, then surely the damaged party should get everything. He shouldn't get half. So then we're saying there's a case where there's not enough evidence. In other words, there's evidence of injury, but not what caused it. There's evidence that two oxen were involved in a scuffle, but we don't know if it was the large ox that attacked the large ox and the small attacked the small, or the tam was attacked or the muad attacked. So there was evidence of combative Keren damage, but not sure what transpired. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So in that particular case, let's go on. So the Gemara challenges the interpretations that the Mishnah is discussing a case in which the litigants say certainly and certainly. Rav Papa objected, if this is true, then since the first part of the Mishnah is discussing a case of certainly and certainly, the latter part of the Mishnah must also be discussing a case of certainly and certainly. What's he saying here, Rav Papa, is when you're taking a case of an ox being chased by another ox, and both of them are certain, the one certain the other ox attacked his ox, and the other one certain that the injured ox injured himself against a rock. He's saying that's a case of certainly and certainly. Each party is adamant, either adamantly lying very well or adamantly sure of their beliefs, but it's not inherently evident. Okay? So he's saying, but their claims are certainly and certainly. But then he's saying that the second part of the Mishnah must also be certainly and certainly. What's the second part of the Mishnah? When we're talking about two oxen attacking two oxen, and the fact of it is that the injured party is definitely sure that it was a large ox that attacked his large ox, and he was definitely sure a muad ox attacked his ox, okay, as opposed to a tam ox. And the damager is sure it was the converse. Small ox attacked big ox, and tam attacked his animal. So that both, so Rav Papa is saying it's in this case also certainly and certainly. Okay. So he's saying if one of the damaging oxen was large and one was small, and the damaged party says the large ox did the damage, while the damager said not so, the small ox did the damage. Or if one of the damaging oxen was tam and the one was muad, and the damaged party says the muad did the damage, while the damager says not so, rather the tam did the damage. In both of these cases, the burden of proof rests on the one who seeks to exact money from his fellow. So this implied that if the damaged party does not bring proof, he takes as much as the damager says. Okay, what do we mean he takes as much as the damager says? He takes the lesser amount, Gavin. In other words, he collects from the tam, even though the damaged party says with certainty that his animal did not inflict the damage. Does that make sense? In other words, let me use an example, Gavin. I'm saying that your muad ox attacked my animal and you owe me full payment damages, right? And you said not true, my tam attacked your ox. Unless I can bring evidence, I have to accept the lesser payment of half payment damages by the gufa of the attacking animal, unless I can prove it was the muad ox that attacked. It doesn't suffice to turn around and say, well, it's more likely it's the muad because it's got a repeated habitual pattern of damaging. That's not good enough. I need evidence. So the default position is unless I give evidence, according to Rav Papa, I have to accept what you're telling me is as the damager that your tam ox attacked, not the muad, unless I can prove it was the muad. Fine. Rav Papa also said, if I say your large ox, in the case of tam ox, and attacked my large ox, I've got to then prove that it was your large ox that attacked my large ox and not your small ox that attacked my large ox, so that I can claim more. In the failure to prove that, I have to accept the fact that the smaller ox attacked my larger ox, unless I can prove to the contrary, according to Rav Papa. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Rav Papa doesn't hold according to Sumquist, it seems. And both parties make sense. You know, it depends what side you're on. You can empathize with both. So guys, listen, I think we can stop here. I don't want to go into a whole discussion on some of the other parts of the Brisa yet with Rabbi Bar Nassan. We'll go through Rabbi Bar Nassan tomorrow. So in summary, let me just summarize this in a few sentences. This is how we're ending up. The standard case where Sumchus and the rabbis disagree is a case in Gemara Bava Kamma 46b, which there's an ox that gored a cow and a dead fetus was found at her side. It's unknown whether the cow aborted the fetus spontaneously before being gored, obviously in which case the owner is not liable for the fetus, or whether it actually aborted the fetus as a result of body shock of being gored, in which case the owner of the ox is now liable for the fetus as well. And because it's a case in which there's inherent doubt, because nobody really knows, Simcha says, listen, let's pay half the fetus. You pay full for the ox, but half for the fetus. So we're saying in this particular Gemara is this case of an ox pursuing an ox, and the damaged party says it was injured by your ox, and I'm saying is the damage it was injured by a rock. This, even if they both claim with certainty that they know what happened, unless the judge has got evidence, he has to say this is the same case of inherent uncertainty, or perhaps and perhaps, instead of certainly and certainly. Rav Papa says, look, he doesn't hold by that in this particular case with regards to a tamur muad or the large ox, because unless the damaged party can bring evidence, he has to then accept what the damager says of the lower amount of either the smaller ox or the tamur ox, unless he brings evidence. And that's Rav Papa's opinion. All right, guys, I hope that summary made sense. Arthur, I hope you're feeling better. I know you're not feeling 100%.
Damon, I actually stayed awake the whole time. I don't know if you...
Yeshakayach. I think you should go on some sort of Red Bull if you don't like coffee, because it does do wonders.
You know what I'll do? When I get back to Israel, I'll buy a 6-pack or something with that blue. But I'm going into quarantine when I get back. So
okay, but okay, you can do that.
Maybe what I'll do is I must buy some stuff here. Yeah, you're right. It's Gavin also said so, and I don't know what.
Otherwise, you can try Turbo Vite.